Hi, everyone, and welcome to Module 1. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the key components within supply chain management. And I'm going to use an example that we could all refer to in using a smartphone, right? So as we said in the introductory video, we have a number of players, a number of different business partners within a supply chain network whenever we're developing our supply chain design. So if we take a smartphone, for example, the first primary component is that we have suppliers. Now, I'm an Apple user, so I'm going to use Apple as an example. Sorry, Samsung users. So once Apple creates the iPhone 50, right? They put one out every year. Whenever they're developing the technology for that product, they have to account for all of the raw materials, the glass, the motherboard, the buttons you see on the phone, the back of the phone, all these components that go into the iPhone, Apple has to identify suppliers or the sourcing for that particular product, okay? So given that Apple designs everything in the US but does not manufacture anything, Apple actually outsources their manufacturing, which means they depend on a third party to produce that product. So back in the day, Foxconn was a manufacturer for Apple. So if we go back to the days of Foxconn, then once Apple has identified all the components that go into this new iPhone, then they'll actually reach out to those suppliers, right? And then those suppliers will actually produce those raw materials, and then they would send those raw materials to Foxconn. So Foxconn will be the manufacturer in this case, right? So they will depend on logistics to send the product, whether it be through air, ship, road, or rail, right? In some cases, where they will ship all these raw materials, all of these components to Foxconn in China. Okay. So once Foxconn is producing all these products, now all of these iPhones are stacking up within a Foxconn manufacturing facility. Now Foxconn needs somewhere to put all of these products. So now they're going to call up a trucking company, and then a trucking company is going to go to the Foxconn manufacturing facility in China and then distribute all of these iPhones from the manufacturing facility to what we refer to as a distributor, right? So a distributor. So when I say distributors, think of Amazon, right? An organization that stores all this product for their sales. So if they have private label, because Amazon has private label products. Once again, Amazon doesn't manufacture anything. They rely on outsourcing the manufacturing of certain products, and they'll put the Amazon label on it, which is referred to as private labeling, right? So going back to the Foxconn example, there's a similar organization in China, similar to Amazon, where Foxconn would send all these finished good iPhones to a distribution center, right? So once Tim Cook goes on stage and talks about how great this new iPhone is, then Apple's going to work with distributors in the US, in China, to get all of these finished good iPhones from that distribution center in China, right? And to ship these products all around the world. China, India, UK, the US, right? And now the distribution center in China sends these products to distribution centers around the world, right? So now once all of these iPhones are in these distribution centers around the world waiting for us as retailers to buy these products, then the distribution centers will coordinate with logistics companies to pick up the products from these distribution centers around the world to distribute these products to AT&T stores, to the Apple stores, to the Verizon stores around the world, right? So I try to make this as simplistic as possible because you have flow of products from A to Z. You have flow of information from A to Z. You have the flow of funds from A to Z, right? So how do we know the Verizon store in Washington, D.C. needs a certain amount of products, right? So Apple is going to use a flow of information. They're going to use their enterprise resource planning application to look at the history from the previous iPhone to see how much of the previous iPhone was sold into that store in Washington, D.C. That's a flow of information, right? And that store had to send that information to Apple, right? So that Apple can create a forecast, which we'll discuss later on in this course, to anticipate how many purchases will be made in that Washington, D.C. location, right? So once they have identified how many products need to be shipped to that Washington, D.C. location, that's where the flow of products come into play, where it goes from a distribution center on the East Coast to that Apple store or Verizon store in Washington, D.C., right? Now, so whenever we say the flow of information, the flow of products, it's what we refer to as upstream and downstream. So in order to understand that, I always say whenever you turn on a faucet, the water flows down. So whenever we have product, the product's gonna flow from the manufacturer, from Foxconn, all the way down to that Apple store or Verizon store in Washington, D.C. So the products were moving downstream. Now, once that product arrives in Washington, D.C., the employees take the product out, they inspect the product. Now they see 5 iPhones are broken, cracked, whatever, right? Hypothetically. So now we have to return those items. So now those items have to move back upstream to either the distribution center or to the manufacturer at Foxconn so they can refurbish, these iPhones, right? So now that's the flow of information. That's the flow of product. So finally, we have the flow of funds. So once that Verizon store receives Apple products, Verizon will be a better example than the Apple store. Once a Verizon store receives the products, now they have to pay for all of those iPhones. So now the Verizon store has to use a flow of funds upstream, right? So they have to pay the distributor that they got those iPhones for. That moves upstream. And then once the distributor receives those funds from the Apple store, now the distributor has to pay Foxconn or Apple. And once again, those flows move upstream, right? Now, going back to our example of the broken iPhones, once the store sends those broken iPhones back up to the distributor, then the distributor refunds that store, and now the funds move downstream. Once again, turn the faucet on, funds move downstream, right? So those are the primary components to the supply chain. I hope that was helpful. Until next time.